Hi, everyone. It's Stephanie with the Patient Story. I hope you're doing well wherever you're joining us from. I am always excited to introduce our guest, but I am extremely excited because this is a friend of mine. I'm so grateful to call a friend who's joining us today. So, Michele Nadeem-Baker, welcome today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. This is really special for me to be interviewed by you because we are friends and we've shared some similar things in our lives.
That's right. And actually, that's a great segue. So first, Michele, I want to thank you again for coming on to share your story about, your diagnosis and experience with CLL. I know so many people will benefit from this, but you talk about the similarities. We both used to work in TV news, and it's a great segue because I love to start by asking people to tell us a little bit about themselves outside of the cancer context, because we are so much more than our diagnosis.
We are so much more, even though that's hard to remember at times, right? At different times during lives with cancer. So my life before CLL, I was very career oriented and family oriented. I was that kind of woman who had to do everything super well. Talk about an A plus. I'm an A plus plus at everything. But I had started out in broadcast journalism, as Stephanie had said, on TV news, and I segued into the corporate world, or as we say in the business, the dark side of journalism. And I went into industry, publicly traded companies, and I ended up being like a coup de grace job. I was the global chief of communications for a $9 billion publicly traded company. And it was a really cool job, very stressful, long hours. When I say long hours, I mean, like I slept a few hours a night, 7 days a week, because due to time zones, due to the media, I'm happily married. I have a terrific husband who is so supportive of everything, of things that I do with friends, things that I do for work, my patient advocacy, and also he is the best care partner there is. And in addition to that, I've always been like a fitness nut and, exercising. I used to go to the gym before COVID. Now I do what I can at home. I do yoga now because I've learned that's really good for you and to calm the mind, as well as writing. And I have Gabby, who a lot of people know is our chocolate lab, and she's my buddy. And we seem to do everything together. She's even here right now. And she has been also great support to me and during all of everything that I go through with cancer and outside of cancer.
There are several periods of time where you feel first symptoms, as we'll call them. Can you describe, and I'll just point out, you mentioned it was November 2010, February 2011, May 2011, and then January, February 2012. So 4 sort of different timeframes you pointed out for first symptoms. What were those?
So I thought I was a healthy person. I always had been very healthy and active. And my God, my schedule alone, I figured you had to be a healthy person to be able to keep the hours I did and to always be traveling everywhere for work. I mean, I was on planes 1 to 2 times a week, and I could be going anywhere in the country or in the world. So fitness and healthy eating was really big for me as well. But I started having these weird things happen. Each one in itself didn't seem like a big deal. And I talk about these so that other patients, when they hear this, will know that these are things they should watch if they have CLL, or also it's things that if you look back, you're like, oh yeah, that happened to me. And it took me a while to even realize that these pieces were there. In November of 2010, as you said, at that time, I had a flu or something that led to chest congestion and sinus infection from hell. And I just couldn't get better. So I went to an ENT, and, they didn't do any blood work or anything. They just treated the symptoms because, they had no clue that anything else could be wrong. And that lasted a really long time. Then a few months later, I remember I was traveling. Each of these times I had just traveled out of the country, long flights, long hours, not eating as healthy as I'm used to, not having time to exercise. So a few months later, something else weird happened. And I had like this weird scalp infection, but it looked like I had burned myself with my flat iron. I mean, it was just like a line, like you would with a flat iron. I'm just like, oh, stupid, clumsy me. Or maybe at the hair salon when I had my hair cut or colored, that had happened. And I had these huge like bumps at the base of my skull. And I had no clue at that time that lymph nodes are everywhere and that those were lymph nodes. And I remember I went to an emergency clinic because it was just so bad. And my husband thought that maybe someone should see it since it looked pretty gross. And so I went there and they gave me a shot of, and I don't even know what it was. Looking back, it was some kind of antibiotic, but then I went to my dermatologist and they, again, treated what that was, didn't put anything together. And then the last, a few other times I just kept getting sick. You know, I would catch a cold and it wouldn't go away. I would get a flu or sinus infection and it just lasted forever. And these are all really common things now that I know about CLL. These are really common things and signs for someone to look at and put all together that you have something.
So I love that you mentioned that there were different things that were happening at the same time, and you'd go to these individual doctors who specialized in treating those specific symptoms. It's hard. I mean, most doctors are not thinking cancer, right, when they see people, because that's usually not what it is. But that's where it's important to be your own advocate, right, Michele? You know, you talk about that a lot too. You saw an immunologist as well. And then in January 2012, you had the elevated white blood cell count.
And mine was maybe at 11 consistently and then 14. And that's what flagged my PCP. And plus, you know, when you see your PCP, not that often. And I just remember he wanted me to come back in maybe 6 months or at the time. And of course I delayed that because of work and I was too busy and I'd kind of forgotten. It was like, I don't even know what that means. What's the big deal? That's like one blood count. And then when I went back, it was still elevated. And that's when he suggested I see a hematologist, which in my mind was a hematologist. I didn't even like connect hematologist, oncologist.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, and I have to admit, I didn't return his calls for a long time until my assistant sat on my desk and said, I'm not leaving until you call your doctor. This is the fourth message. You've got to call. And it didn't dawn on me because, you know, I didn't think about it. I didn't take the time to think about it. I was so busy with everything. I just was like, why is he calling me? You know, I didn't even think there could be anything wrong.
You're like, I'm busy at work. Why are you bothering me so much? Right?
Exactly. I'm just like, which is something you shouldn't do. I have since learned, and I learned the hard way. And he was very calm about it. I have to give him credit. You know, I don't want you to be alarmed. You know, your white blood count's a little elevated again. I really would love you to go get this tested again and see a hematologist. I was like, okay, I'll figure that out someday in my mind, you know? Yeah, someday I'll go do that.
And I love that you highlight this, Michele, because it is one of the examples, and I've heard this from many people, where we put the health stuff on the back burner. If the symptoms aren't like glaringly, you know, like if we're not having a heart attack, if we're not getting carried out on a stretcher into an ambulance, it's something that we can store away for a while. And I love that you're saying, maybe when the doctor's calling you several times, don't let that sort of slide. But look, hindsight's 2020. So what happened after that? You finally get hooked up to a hematologist. By the way, how did you find the hematologist? Was it just per recommendation by your PCP?
So my PCP I was in Florida, so living in South Florida. Something wrong with that too. My family's in Boston. I'm in South Florida, between Boston, South Florida, and everywhere else. And my PCP was a bit north of where I worked, and he knew how busy I was. And he said, you know, I don't know anybody in Miami, but see if you know anybody who can make a recommendation for you. So someone I knew who was a nurse recommended this particular doctor. I walked in, it was University of Miami Sylvester Cancer Center, and it still didn't dawn on me what I was being tested for. So I went through tests and questions, not knowing, having no clue. Nobody told me why I was being tested. So maybe he assumed my PCP told me, And my PCP maybe figured, he told me, I had no clue. And I'm like, why is he asking me this? Why are they taking so many tubes of blood? And why is he telling me, I'm sure you're fine? I honestly, I know I had no clue. And here, but I mean, seriously, talk about, I was so busy. I registered where I was, that it was a cancer institute at University of Miami Medical Center, but I never, ever put two and two together that could be me.
To your credit though, Michele, I think most of us are not thinking like this is cancer, especially when we hear another word, not oncologist, you're like, oh, hematologist. Maybe they just happen to work at this center, right? And I love that you said, you're like, I don't even know why he's saying, I'm sure you're fine. Like that's a phrase you don't even want to hear. I'm sure you're fine.
He did a verbal, really long list of questions for family history, basically. And, my parents were very healthy in all their lives and, in living long lives. And it's not like they were young and passing away. So yeah, again, I was just like, oh, this is taking so long. I have to get back to work. I mean, this is how crazed about work I was. And I look back and I realize that that's probably not the best way to be in life. You really have to think about your health at times. Right. But it also protected, the other thing is though, it protected me in a way from knowing how grave this could be. And just that I'm here, I see people hooked up to IVs as I'm walking through. I see cancer patients and in wheelchairs, sadly, without hair. And when I walked in there, I didn't think that could be me. It didn't even register. And if I had time, perhaps I would have been a basket case, because it's shocking to think that that's you, that's your future.
I know, absolutely. And you're so right. It might have been a sort of a blessing in disguise, at least in that moment. Ignorance is bliss, right? Because otherwise we experience anxiety or scanxiety or any anxiety related to waiting for results, which is so hard.
Oh, it is. I know it now. I know right, that now.
Yes, I'm sure you've experienced that plenty now. But in that first time, it took about a week, right? Until you were then told, okay, go back to meet with the doctor to go over the results.
It took a while to get any kind of call. And I put it out of my mind. I'm like, okay, whatever. I guess I'll hear something if anything's bad. And it took a couple of weeks. And then I heard from someone in the doctor's office that everything was fine. That's great. I'm like thinking, of course it's great. I'm healthy. Put it out of my mind. I get a call a week later. That's the call you're thinking of. And she said, the doctor wants to go over your test results. And I said, I thought you said everything was fine. Well, he just wants to meet with you. And I'm like, this is really nice, but I'm thinking like my schedule is so packed. So she said, no, really, he really just wants to go over these things. I'm like, okay, whatever. And again, you would think that it would dawn on me and I'd be petrified, but I was not. So I rushed over there.
To your credit, we're not thinking that normally, but okay. So you rush over there.
And I was just, as the English would say, gobsmacked. I sat down and I have no clue what he's going to say. And he came in and he said, well, you have the C word. This is how out of tune I was. And I'm like, what is he talking about? Because it wasn't top of the mind awareness what the C word was, because again, I didn't know I was being tested for the C word. And I'm thinking the C word, this is and I'm like, oh no, that C word. And then he blurted out, you have CLL. And I'm like, okay, another C word, chronic lymphocytic leukemia. But he said it so fast and I was in shock. And I really was just like, huh? I was dumbfounded. Just, what did he just say to me? And of course that changed my life right there and then. And I heard leukemia. That's all I heard. I'm like, this doesn't sound good. And he said, so I'll see you in 4 months. And he went to leave. And I said, wait. And of course, having my journalism training, I always have a million questions. And I wait, shouldn't we get rid of this now? The things that we would normally think that are logical for cancer. And he's like, oh, no, you don't have to be, you don't have to be treated. You may never have to be treated. And this is just not making sense. I'm in shock on top of it. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? And he said, just go on, make sure you wear a mask when you're in public. Like, but I didn't understand. I'm like, why? I needed more information. He could not wait to leave the room. And I asked, do you have any literature on this? How about on the hospital's website? Is there somewhere you can suggest for me to look this, for me to research this? And he had nothing. And that was it. And then he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, don't worry, you'll be okay. He was an older doctor. I just want to say he was an older doctor. He did get it right on my diagnosis. But when I walked out, I just knew that I probably wouldn't go back there. I knew something wasn't right. And again, for me, that wasn't my cup of tea.
Right.
To be treated that way, and also to never be told what it was I was being tested for. And
yeah,
I was really in shock. And he couldn't even say the word. Oh, the other thing he said after, he said, you have the C word, but it's the best one you can have. And so none of this is making sense in my brain. It's like, C word. When that clicked in, I'm like, how can that be best of anything? It's cancer. How are you best when you're cancer? And I've heard this from other patients.
Yes.
Since,
yes.
And they say they're told that, like, it's the best one you can have. And that just so offends everyone.
Right.
So
right.
docs, if you're watching, maybe you shouldn't say that anymore.
So a couple, takeaways from the patient perspective would be, you started with, don't say it's the good kind of cancer. What else would you say?
Don't say it's the C word. And also the other thing is, if you're testing someone, and again, this could be style between doctors and not to get patients overly worried, but maybe you should let them know what you're testing for, or maybe list a few things it could be. And maybe he didn't know which kind of blood cancer. But since I was sent to a hematologist oncologist, and maybe this was my PCP who should have I don't know who should have told me, but you would think they had an idea if that's the kind of doctor I was sent to. So let me know, or put it in a list of various things it could be if you're worried about you don't want to overly worry me in case it's nothing. And that again could be a generational thing between the doctor, and that he was, he was older, and he would have been like from my father's generation.
But I think what this is highlighting is really important, no matter what generation of doctors. It's that, communication is so key. And whether you're trying to protect a patient from being too anxious, I think the worst case scenario is when people feel like something's being withheld. And they don't know what's going on. And in fact, erring on the side of, hey, look, here's what you need to know, and I understand if you might have questions, but giving just even basic understanding of what this is. Look, the odds of this being cancer are probably on this, whatever this side, but here, this is why we're doing this. And on the other part of this too, Michele, you talking about how he just was itching to leave the room. I'm sure that it was from his experience. Maybe he thought, I don't want them to worry too much. Maybe if I leave, they'll understand it's not that big of a deal. But it's like, no, tell us what we're dealing with. You've just told me a cancer. Please don't walk out of the room. Tell me what basically we're dealing with, right?
I was just like the jilted girlfriend holding on at the last moment, like, please don't leave me, And of course, now I can look back and joke about it because, of course, we have self-deprecation, having cancer and having been through these horrible things. And yes, that was a very low day in my life. And I proceeded to make some pretty stupid decisions after. But the other thing is, I drove myself, and it wasn't around the corner from where I worked. And I'm just like, again, that shouldn't happen.
Again, to your credit, you had no idea that was what was coming down the pipeline. Okay. And so I've heard this too, other people going to appointments on their own and then, being completely surprised when they get the diagnosis. So Just a couple more questions on this portion of it. But one, how did you, I mean, it takes a long time to process something like this, but how did you sort of process it after that? Did you go home? Did you say, I want to tell people? Were you like, I want to be private? How did that all go?
I went back to work and acted like nothing happened. And I went home and curled up in a ball. And well, before I did that, I burned the hospital bracelet in my bathroom, like it didn't happen. And I did it so that, I had water running so I wouldn't set off. I mean, this is me. I'm always saying everything. I don't want to set off the smoke detectors. I burned it because I guess I was so upset. Like didn't happen maybe if I burned it. I don't know. And also the whole way it went down, there's nothing wrong, come back in. And then I convinced myself, well, maybe this was wrong. Maybe they had somebody else's blood test results. I curled up in the fetal position after I looked, which I tell patients now, do not do this. I went on Google and did a search and it said I'd be dead. And some said 3 to 5 years, some said 5 to 8 years. And that was very old information that I found, or speculative. And I hadn't yet learned that first night what the credible sites would be and how they're credible. And at that time, again, this is 2012, there wasn't as much available as well on the internet about our various diseases. I remember I called my sister. I told her wait to hear this one. I was going to leave my husband. We had not even been married 2 years, and that it wasn't fair for him to have another wife with cancer. His first wife had cancer, and she had passed, and I just couldn't do that to him. And she talked sense into me. She's like, you need to hang up with me and call him right now and tell him what's wrong. And I was just like, I just can't do this to him and the kids, because his children became my children. And I just didn't want them all to go through this again. So it was really hard on so many levels. But I 911'd him when I hung up with her after she talked sense into me. And I don't even know how this was. And he was on the first plane out in the morning. So it was too late for him to take one at night. There weren't any more. So he was on the first plane in the morning because he was in Boston. I was in Miami. And that's when it really hit, is when you're together and share it. I don't know how he even got on, to the airport himself and how he got on that plane. And then we figured out what I was going to do. And it was basically, I had to leave. I left Miami. I left everything, parted with work, my home down there, my life down there, my friends. I had some really terrific friends because I had been down there about 7 years for my career, but I realized what's more important, health and family. And my mom was up in Massachusetts as well. But I didn't even tell my mother for a long time because I didn't want her to worry. And I knew I wasn't going to be in treatment. And I thought, well, if I'm not in treatment, I have no clue what to even tell people. So I have it. So what? Because of this crazy watch and wait thing. But I had a second opinion within, I want to say 6 weeks at Dana-Farber with the head of the CLL department. I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a specialty in CLL. And that was something else I wish that the doctor had mentioned in Miami. But so I was just so lucky and blessed that, near where we lived in Boston, maybe 7 miles away, there was such a thing as a CLL specialist, an entire department. So I started seeing her. That was my second opinion that, yes, in fact, I was hoping that those tests were wrong. I really did hold on to that hope in the back of my mind. I knew there was something, if I thought about all those things that I had mentioned earlier, there was.
Everything in your life was completely upended, right? And you had to shift. Michele, I had to fight back tears as you were talking about not wanting to tell your husband and being like, I'm just going to leave him. I don't want to drag him through more pain because he'd experienced something so devastating before. I mean, that alone, is enough to make someone emotional. But I wonder how you're the one who's told you have cancer, and you read all these things on Google and you're thinking about your mortality. And yet, I think what hits you the most is thinking about the impact on the people you love, your husband, your mom, right? That's incredible.
Yeah, and the kids. Yeah, but it affects everyone in your, in your family circle. So it was, yeah, I wasn't thinking straight either, but I did worry about them. And I just didn't think that it was, fear is probably the wrong word, because none of it's fair, right, to any of us, but, or maybe fear is not even I don't even know what word, but.
I've heard this before from people talking about it in the sense of, I don't want to be a burden on the people I love the most. Mm-hmm. I don't want my problem to become their problem, which, which by the way, I think the message is, it's okay. They want to be there for you, right? They want to be there for you. They do.
They absolutely do.
So thank you so much, Michele, for sharing all of that and, being so open about it. Watch and wait, you said, I learned it was the real thing. So please, for people who especially are just now, maybe they just got diagnosed or they're not familiar with watch and wait, what does that mean? What was your life like in the, I guess, 3 years or so until you had to start treatment?
So watch and wait is also called active surveillance, and it exists in some other things as well. There's another blood cancer where it's called a few different things as well. So it's, what patients call it is wait and worry, or watch and worry, as opposed to, and it's somewhat inhumane when you think about it, and that you're basically waiting and watching your disease worsen until it would be so bad, and that's when you need treatment, versus doing it the way you logically would with a different type of cancer that we have all heard about, which you treat early, get rid of it, and you have better chances. So not everyone, though, gets worse. And CLL is such an odd disease that not everyone needs to be treated. There are some patients who never need treatment, so that watch and wait could be forever for them. And until they test certain things like your genetic factors, prognostic indicators, they don't know how you will be and how your disease will progress or not. That's one factor that they look at. And I was, from the time of diagnosis, I do suspect I had CLL longer before, from different factors and signs. But from diagnosis, they say it's generally an average of 2.5 years to treatment, which is just about what it was for me. And in that time, and I've heard this from so many other patients, and I just want to tell you, if you're watching this, use that time of watch and wait to educate yourself on CLL, because it helps for when you do need treatment, if you ever need treatment, but also it shows you, I was diagnosed 10 years ago and I'm here. And there's just so much hope for patients, but it also helps prepare you for what's going to happen. And also for me, I know, like Stephanie, you were talking about no communications, not knowing. For me, the more I know, the better it is for me, because then I know more of the facts, as opposed to me wondering. And that's when my mind kind of goes like to places it shouldn't go. So once I could understand facts, it really helped to calm me down. And that's really why I started reporting on CLL for other patients, to help them, to demystify what it's all about.
I love that. And we will also, I know you are still such an active patient advocate and leader, and we'll talk about your work later in this conversation. Go check out Kicking Cancer in Heels if you are curious now. But I know you do a lot of different work, Michele. I want to rewind a little bit, because so for instance, I had a blood cancer, but it was non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and it was very aggressive. So a fast growing form of cancer. And CLL is an indolent or slow growing. So you have two very different situations. Mine was aggressive, and then aggressive treatment right away. But it was like, if you're lucky, and I've been so far, knock on wood, it's high intensive treatment, and then you are hopefully in remission. Whereas for CLL, it's like you said, it's this long sort of, it's more like this chronic disease sort of paradigm where you may not even have to ever treat it, to your point. But then I can't even imagine what I think would be a lot of anxiety to be living your life. For you, it was seeing a specialist every 2 months, right? I mean, you have to get blood tests. Basically, that's how it's your measuring stick. How are my levels? Let's just keep going and hope that they don't go up.
Correct. But there are some patients who do need to be treated immediately. So there is a percentage of patients that do need treatment immediately, and they don't like that either, as opposed to being able to watch and wait. And for the watch and wait, it's like every time you go, you wonder, will this be the appointment that they tell me? But you start to learn, and also open communications with your doctor. So when will you know it's time? Can you give me an idea how long, in your experience, for someone like me, it'll be? Because again, we are so different, all of us. And it's tough because there's so many factors. For my white blood count at a certain amount, it was that, and it was lymph node burden. It was spleen size and all sorts of things. Whereas other patients, I know I have a friend her white blood count is at 240,000, and it has been, but it's not time for treatment for her due to other factors in her blood work and in the exams that you get. So for me, it was totally different. So that's why it's so important to make sure you do keep your appointments. So for me, it was every 3 months, and then every 2 months as I got closer to treatment. And then it was just, time.
Can you actually, since we won't go into the medical jargon or the weeds of it, but since you brought up that there are different factors, right, to be considered into whether you continue watching and wait or you are having to go into treatment, that it's not just for you, it might be the white blood cell counts plus, what were those factors? Like for your friend, what was different for what was for you?
So for a lot of the patients I've spoken to, it really does vary. And one of the things that helps determine this, like for doctors to watch and they have an idea how things will go, is from something called a FISH test. And that will show your genetic markers, your prognostic indicators. And they also do something called a flow cytometry. And I suggest to patients, I know there are a good number who have never had these done and they're not in treatment yet. I do suggest that you ask for those, because it does help for you to know what those are. And so for me, it was a combination. It was my platelets started going low, below range. It was my white blood count started doubling, although it never even got as high as this other person I'm speaking of, is in the, and I know other patients that have gotten even higher white blood counts and still aren't in treatment. But it was my lymph nodes, and they can tell that by physical examination. I mean, you could see my lymph nodes. They were all swollen. You could see them here, but it wasn't only my lymph nodes. It was a combination of platelets. There are other counts they look at. They want to look at your hemoglobin to see how that's doing. And then all that put together, and it takes a specialist really to put all those, it's like a puzzle, all these puzzle pieces together, that then is the point. So for someone else, it might be that their white blood count gets so high and their platelets tank, maybe lower than mine did. And maybe their spleen is really swollen. So it's time for them. But there are all different indicators there that help. I know someone else who their white blood count went down, but they had CLL, and some other factors happened. So it's that varied for patients, depending on what it is about their disease for time to treatment. But I do also encourage second opinions as well.
100%. I could not agree more. And thank you for summarizing that. It's a really important point. 1, second opinion. 2, seeing a CLL specialist. And 3, that understanding you and your disease and the way your body is so important, because the factors that are sending someone into treatment now may not be the same for you. And so it's really important to know that this is about understanding what's going on with you. So thank you so much, Michele. We are now going to move on to our second sort of segment here, talking about when you did go into treatment, also relapse and more watch and wait. And that will be happening in this next segment. So stick around.